the study of spirituality at FIU. And I just wanted to say that we're also being co-sponsored tonight by the Center for Humanity and the Urban Environment, who is responsible for filming this lecture so that it will be archived through the library's website, I believe. So you can tell all your friends what they missed and they can watch it online. Also, SEAS, which is the School for
Environment, Arts, and Society.
Thank you, Environment, Arts, and Society. We just switched to all these different acronyms for different schools, and yeah, and I get confused with this alphabet soup. So, and also the Asian Studies program, where Dr. Tucker will be speaking tomorrow. Her primary, she started out in Confucian Studies, and so she will be part of a program tomorrow for the Asian Studies program, and also by the University of Miami Religious Studies Department, where she lectured last night on the journey of the universe, so which she will say more about. So just to give you a little bit about the program in the study of spirituality, every year we have a lecture series, which is you'll see on this brochure that was passed around. We also offer a certificate in the study of spirituality, which looks at spirituality across the disciplines. So it's not, as opposed to religious studies where you take all religious studies classes, spirituality you can take classes in literature, history, even in some sciences, environmental sciences. So we have literally classes on this curriculum all throughout the university. It's a 6-course certificate. You don't have to be a student to do this. You can just sign up as a special student if you want to do a certificate in the study of spirituality. So check it out on our website through FIU. Just Google FIU program in the study of spirituality, you'll find it. So the program in the study of spirituality was formed because we wanted to look at spirituality sort of as it's integrated in daily lives and different practices, right? So it's not just that someone's spirituality is attached to their religion, but you can find spirituality in, like we'll talk about tonight some, through environmentalism, right? In your daily life, through your profession, right? It's called vocation instead of your profession. So spirituality is something that transcends any given tradition, although religious traditions do contribute to spirituality. And that's the goal of the program in the study of spirituality, really, is to find these sort of odd places that people don't usually look for spirituality. So that brings us to the topic for tonight, which is religion and ecology, which may sound a little odd to some of you who are not familiar with these two words together. This is sort of my area, so it's not odd to me anymore, but it was odd the first time I heard it, so I can only imagine if you're just coming to this conversation that it sounds a little bit odd, but hopefully by the end you'll have an aha and understand a little bit more about what's going on in this field. So I'm just going to read this because I prepared something. So one of the great privileges and honors of being somewhat mysteriously knighted into the realm of professorhood, I'm not really sure how that happens, but it happened to me, is that eventually you just may get the chance to honor your mentors, and this is the case tonight. Mary Evelyn Tucker and her husband John Grimm have been tireless advocates for younger generations of scholars, just slightly younger, entering the field of religion and ecology, and I'm no exception to this. The first time I went to the American Academy of Religion meeting, which is the big association of like 10,000 religious studies scholars from all over the world that descend on some poor town for about 5 days. The first time I went to this meeting and delivered a paper as just a lowly master's student, Mary Evelyn and John were there. The subject of my paper was on eco-pedagogy, and I shudder to think of how awful the paper must have been. However, just after the session, Mary Evelyn came up to me with great words of encouragement and ideas for how I might strengthen and deepen my arguments. Then, as a graduate student in Berkeley, working with a fledgling organization we called the Theological Roundtable on Ecological Ethics and Spirituality, just because we wanted the acronym TREES, Mary Evelyn and John both encouraged the work we were doing at the university and in the community. Finally, as a recent graduate with no job prospect post-dissertation, Mary Evelyn and John worked out a sort of postdoc position for me to work with them at the Forum on Religion and Ecology, which is what I did the year after graduate school before coming here to FIU to be a professor. Ever since, we've been collaborators, colleagues, and friends, and for this I'm personally grateful to be introducing her to you all tonight. Mary Evelyn received her PhD at Columbia University with an expertise and many publications on Confucianism. More importantly, for this evening, she and her husband, John, studied world religions with the late Thomas Berry and were collaborators with him for over 35 years. From 1995 to 1998, they led a series of conferences at the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions, which culminated in 10 edited volumes on specific religious traditions and ecology. This bedrock led them to establish the Forum on Religion and Ecology, which is now housed at the Yale School of Forestry and the Yale Divinity School, where they're now both senior lecturers and senior research scholars. The Forum, and especially the groundwork of Mary Evelyn and John, have literally created the habitat known as religion and ecology that I now get to play around in. They are not mere academicians, but have a deep passion for helping shift our consciousness toward what I would call planetary citizens and citizens of the journey of the universe. Their work as leaders of the trustees of the Thomas Berry Foundation, their work with Brian Swim on the Emmy Award-winning film Journey of the Universe, and subsequent book by the same name, their work on the Earth Charter with the United Nations, and there are dozens of book projects, hundreds of articles, and scores of conferences organized around the world have quite literally transformed the field of religious studies in a way that, as Mary Evelyn suggests, religions are now awakening to their ecological context. If Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, to use a local reference, helped transform our understanding of the Everglades, and Mary Evelyn has for sure, and John have quite literally transformed the field of religious studies in a similar way. And it's with great joy that I present to you here tonight, Mary Evelyn Tucker.
Well, thank you so much, Whitney. That was very touching, really, and Whitney has been such a very dear colleague and friend to John and me from the very beginning. Okay, yeah. And Evelyn, thank you so much. We share a name, and we share many interests, and I'm delighted to hear of the science and humanities coming together, exactly what we're trying to do in Journey of the Universe. So I'm going to launch in here and go through some of these slides, and then we'll have time for discussion. Okay? So this is a field that's still emerging, but it has these elements of research and education and outreach. We also have this film and book project and a series of conversations, as I was saying to Evelyn, with scientists and environmentalists on how can the huge ethic of evolution help us towards sustainability and give us hope and empowerment. So when we talk about both of these projects, one more overtly dealing with religion and the other dealing with a big picture for people who might be outside of the area of religion, but both projects are trying to assist science and policy in valuing the complexity of life systems for a sustainable future. Now we know that our attitudes and behaviors are shaped by a variety of things, our attitudes towards nature, which include the world's religions, which include environmental ethics. I'll skip biophilia for a minute, aesthetics and the arts, and obviously science and empirical knowing. Everyone knows what biophilia is? Okay, that's why I skipped over it. Anyone want to take a guess? Whitney, why don't you?
This is the term that Neil Wilson comes up to describe a sort of inherent love for life, inherent joy of life.
Yeah. And some people are saying this is inherent to humans, okay? So this has shaped human cultures around the world. So now, I want to say from the very beginning, religions, you might be here with some skepticism and so on. How can we say in the world that we live in, religions are going to matter for this issue? So I want to just say they have their problems and they have their promise. Clearly, there's plenty of intolerance and fundamentalisms and conflict and so on, and antipathy to science in the US more than in lots of other parts of the world, and also resistance to change. However, there's large numbers of people, there's the power of text and tradition, schools and seminaries, institutional greening of churches, of synagogues, mosques, and so on, and the possibility for change over time, which is absolutely critical, because this isn't something that the other disciplines can do well, but religions have thought through many issues in a timely and time-intensive manner into the future. So this is just a sort of a round robin of some of the books that have come out on things like Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, joining ecology and justice from the liberation theology. Larry Rasmussen, Earth Community, Earth Ethics, saying now more than ever before, we can't have an ethics without a whole sense of the Earth community. Christianity and Ecology, that's one of the 10 volumes. One of our the main teacher that Whitney referenced, Thomas Berry, saying the Christian future has got to be linked up to the Earth future. And again, the Christian ethics have got to be extended. That's more or less within a very Christian framework, but all of the religions have many publications along these lines that are emerging. And again, I'm touching here on the Christian traditions more specifically, but I want to highlight that the Pope Francis, who happens to be one of the more popular people on the planet these days, fortunately, because he's humanizing religion and himself. But how many of you have heard that he is going to do an encyclical on the environment? Okay, a few of you. And do you know what is an encyclical? Do you know?
An official document of the church.
Right, exactly. So it's a very big pastoral statement, right? Probably be about 50 pages, and it's coming out this summer. He's also going to speak at the UN about this. It's going to have a focus on environment and climate change and justice and so on. And then he's going to speak in Philadelphia, and he's been invited to speak in the Congress. And all of this is leading towards the December climate change discussions in Paris. So this is probably the biggest moment for religion and ecology on the planet. There's 1.2 billion Catholics, 2 billion Christians altogether. It's going to be enormous. We are getting calls every week now on this. I just talked last night to a Reuters guy. We're doing a panel at Yale on this even before it comes out. So I'm just underscoring this because it's actually a very hopeful sign. And many scientists are very excited about this, okay? And everybody's trying to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to catch this ball and run with it, right? Those who are lobbying Congress even. Okay, so, and I like to give hopeful signs because there's a lot of sad, bad news in this field of the environment. But the other person who's been a very well-known leader, maybe not as well-known, obviously, as the Pope, but he's the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, and he, in the early 90s, actually from 95 forward, did a whole series of symposiums on water issues, largely in Europe and so on. But he was speaking about crimes against creation and ecological sin. His writings are fantastic. He's very much influenced this Pope. They're good friends and so on. The woman there is Catherine Jeffers Shorey, who's with the Episcopal Church, the leading bishop of the Episcopal Church. She's got a degree in oceanography, a PhD, and has testified before Congress. And then Joel Hunter is right here in your state, I believe, one of the leading evangelical leaders. And evangelicals are coming on board on these issues as well. So I've just said something about the leaders, but I want to really emphasize that this is happening on the ground too. The Interfaith Power and Light is now all over the country, in every state, helping churches and synagogues and mosques to change their carbon footprint, change their light bulbs, understand their energy, and so on. And I understand Emily Wurzbach, right, is here helping organize pastors and others in the area on these issues. So just keep in mind, leaders, grassroots people, and academics are all involved in this, all right? So I want to just take a step back, and this would be how we're discussing this within academia as a field. So it's a field in academia, but it's a force in the larger society, right? So we're trying to simply say that religion and ecology explores how humans relate to daily and seasonal cycles, that all the religions are deeply involved in how you fit into seasonal cycles, agricultural rhythms, biodiversity and bioregions, solar and lunar phases, right? What's the big lunar event that just happened for 1/5 of the world's people? The Chinese New Year. You see, it's huge, right? And it's literally all over the world. So people who, their New Year is according to the lunar calendar, right? So it's different. So I'm simply saying we weave ourselves in, as cultures and religion, into Earth systems and planetary systems even. So this is what we were trying to identify when we did these 3-year conferences at Harvard and then 10 volumes. Just say, okay, how does Islam do this? How does Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism? And you know, the best thing about this was it was new at the time. It was difficult to do. Harvard's a scary place, you know, and very filled with its own importance, in case you hadn't noticed. But there was such generosity of the people who came from Asia because they knew this was going to be a huge issue. And the scientists who helped us, E.O. Wilson and many, many others. So I'm saying this especially to young people in the room who might have some ideas that you want to put forward. You can do it if you draw on the generosity and a vision for the future. And this is what I think your environmental program is about as well. Now, what is it that we learned in those conferences? I'm just going to go through sort of 5 or 6 R's. A reverence, that all the traditions share this, not at the same level, but there's a reverence for the earth community in these traditions. There's this respect for species that we're trying to bring forward, okay? There's a sense of restraint in the use of natural resources, including water and respect for food and so on. There's a sense of the importance of redistribution of technology and aid. Many of the religions, especially some of the Western religions, have been hugely influential in aid for development issues and so on, and now on the environment too. So reciprocity with all life, the sense of resonance with life systems, that this is a living earth community, okay, is what religions understand. This isn't dead matter to be exploited. There's something living here, beautiful, spiritual. Why is Florida so attractive to people? It's a beautiful environment. So then this sense of responsibility for future of life, the long-term thinking that is so much needed for future generations, and not just of humans, but of all species. And then finally, a sense of restoration of ecosystems, the resilience terms that are coming up in ecology and so on. But you know, it's not just restoring the Everglades, the largest project of restoration on the planet. It's very exciting, right here in your backyard. And Whitney took me to the Everglades this afternoon. It's so moving. It's just so beautiful, right? But the other part of it is there's a restoration of the human spirit that we have to generate ourselves for long-term change amidst immense problems that Evelyn was speaking to as well. So we speak of religious ecology and religious cosmology, that there's symbolic understandings of our ecological interdependence, how humans are embedded in nature, but also there's this sense of how we're part of a huge unfolding reality, that all religions have their cosmologies and stories, and that we've emerged from the universe, so we're interdependent. I mean, Buddhism teaches this all the time. This is our book on ecology and religion, which is a partner to Whitney's book on religion and ecology, and I think there's so much in common in what we're doing together, really. So I want to take a step back and say, how did I get into this? Because I think our own stories are always interesting. You know, why is water so important for Evelyn and your colleagues and so on? So I went to Japan as a young person, 73, 74, to teach at a university there, and it totally changed my life because I came, you know, there weren't many Asian studies programs at that time. So here's just what's called a torii from Shinto. I began to be fascinated with what oriented people to the universe in these traditions. So you've got Shinto marking the entryway to a huge shrine, very famous shrine. You have Buddhism, in particular Zen Buddhism. And you can see here, these are water patterns that are done, you know, with rocks and stones. But these Zen gardens were just mesmerizing for me as a place of meditation into nature and into a feeling of the cosmos, really. In addition to Shinto and Buddhism, we have Confucianism, which is far less known, but it's a tradition that had a political element, educational element. It's why, this is stereotyping a bit, but You know, East Asian students are very good students, and it's partly because of Confucianism, because you're supposed to be cultivating yourself, giving respect to your family, and so on. It's an extraordinary tradition. I'll say a little bit more about it soon. So all of these were gateways to a sense of what is it that makes Japanese culture and East Asian culture come alive, and how different is all of this. But there was this element of nature in Japan and East Asia. Excuse me. So we have here the great symbol of Fuji and so on, and we have a reality of a polluted archipelago. You know, it's a very small country with millions and millions of people. We have these, all through Asia, these magnificent rice paddies that are done in incredible intensity of human labor and irrigation. But we also have, as we know, nuclear power right next to it. The Fukushima accident 3 years ago in Japan has been devastating for that country and its economy and its future sources of energy. Here's a place in southern China, Guilin, very famous tourist place. But here's what's happened to the rivers in so many parts of China, where just one release from a plant, you know, you've heard about this and so on. And as well, when I first went to China in the early 80s, this was Beijing, you know. This is Beijing today, and Shanghai, and so many of these cities. There are 30+ million people in more than a dozen cities in China. You know, our cities here in the US, the largest being New York, 10 million people. But there's not more than, on the whole North American continent, there's not more than a dozen cities, more than 1 million people. The size and scale of Asia is not to be believed unless you've been there, and I'm sure many of you have. So why would something like Confucianism and Taoism have some relevance here? And this is why we started these conferences, because we were so concerned about, as modernization took place in China and India in particular, they're going to change the face of the planet, and they are already. So Confucianism has, I wish I had more time to discuss this, but it has very profound teachings of this interdependence of cosmos, earth, and human. It's not a radical transcendent to a God way up there in the sky. It's a very deeply connected cosmology. It has this sense we as humans are part of nature, part of the whole, the micro and the macro relations. The seasonal cycles that I've mentioned, harmonizing with nature, cultivating nature is a spiritual process, and celebrating fecundity. This is a tradition more than almost any other that celebrates change. You know, Buddhism has this withdrawal from change, and so you come into a sense of stasis and meditation. But this actually celebrates change in very radical and exciting ways. So, contrary to what is really known here in the West, it's not in our newspapers, but you know, we're dealing with 1.2 billion people. We're dealing with the fact that the Chinese know they are up against 100,000 protests a year on the environment. This is huge. You can barely, has anybody been to Beijing here? You can barely breathe, right? And all the foreign folks are coming back and they're worried about their children and safety issues and food and air and water. This is basic. You know, this isn't some abstract political issue. This is breathing. This is safe food and water. So what are they trying to do? Only the oldest civilization on the world would come up with this term, ecological civilization or ecological culture, right? So they're trying to say, we have got to create a mindset around a sustainable future, not just science and policy and so on. We've got to create an ecological culture. How would one do that? But they're drawing on Confucianism. So there's a massive revival of Confucianism in these various ways. So there's government policy. We met with Pan Yue in 2008, the Minister for the Environment, and he was like, we have to have our values, of our traditions for an environmental ethics. We're not going to use Christianity or Judaism and so on. So he was very into this. The president is constantly saying we need these values. The Constitution has a sense of ecological culture and ecological civilization as an aim for China. There's all kinds of academic conferences on this. They've translated the 3 volumes of the Harvard series of Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism into Chinese, and so on. But one of the most interesting ones is this last, the popular level. So, like the US, there's an addiction to materialism, because we've given that as a dream around the world, right? And so there's all kinds of high-level shopping, high-end goods, and so on. But you know what? As we know, materialism only goes so far. And there is such a revival of a need for meaning. I could speak the rest of the evening on this in China. But indicated by the fact that just one book on Confucius sold 10 million copies. Because people are like, what is our culture? You see, that was pretty much destroyed under Mao. So you had this intense, Mao wanted to get rid of these traditions so he could put forward his own ideology. So you've got a massive revival, but a revival for meaning and ecological culture. It's fascinating. Now, I often do this lecture with my husband, so we're going to another worldview entirely, but we've been adopted into the Crow tribe in Montana. So we've just jumped 6,000 miles back to the US. So this is the family we're adopted into, and the point here is we all know, and I'm not trying to idealize them, but we know indigenous peoples around the world have had a profound sense of connection to nature, right? And one of their great rituals of all the Plains people is the sun dance, and we've been out there many, many times. John has danced in the sun dance 8 times, which is a symbolic setting up of a lodge. You have the whole area is camped where there's teepees and so on. The families come to support the dancers. You have right in the middle of the lodge the buffalo as the totemic animal for the tribe, and an eagle, and so on. This is extraordinary wovenness into that bioregion. And you fast for 3 days and 3 nights, praying not only for yourself and your community, but for all the world. These are traditions and peoples that have some of the poorest places on the North American continent are our reservations, and they're still keeping these alive. It's quite amazing. So you have religious ecology and religious ecology, a cosmology, leading to resistance. And I want to just say the ecological resistance of Native peoples and First Nations in Canada is extraordinary. So one example here is the protests on the tar sands, taking the oil out of Alberta, Canada, and that's why the Keystone Pipeline is such a huge issue. But in addition to the Keystone, they're trying to take that oil west, right, to all the ports from Seattle down, and the Pacific ports, the Pacific Northwest in Canada, British Columbia. They have just saved the largest rainforests in the North American continent, which is called the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia. We just met at Yale 2 days ago with this guy who's saying, there's people in those forests who've lived there for 10,000 years, and they are being, their whole region and way of life will be wiped out. They are protesting all up and down this Pacific coast. It's extraordinary. Naomi Klein calls it blockadia in her latest book. It's very, very interesting. But this is part of where religion and ecology meets the ground, literally. It was only a few years ago that the United Nations actually finally passed this rights of indigenous people to their culture, to their land, to their tradition. It's a fascinating story. So, for all these reasons, we're trying to say religions need to re-examine their tradition. We need to retrieve and re-examine and reconstruct these traditions. That's partly an academic project, and it's partly the field and the force coming together. And that's why we established this Forum on Religion and Ecology. We have a huge website. I hope you'll take a look at it. It's on the little brochure that you just got. We've got bibliographies and texts and statements and so on. But we have these engaged projects all over the world, on the ground, what people are doing. We've got a whole section on climate change. We've added a whole frequently asked questions on the Pope and his encyclical. how you would teach this. There's a newsletter. You can sign up for that. It goes out to about 10,000 people around the world. These are other things we've done on climate change. This whole issue of Daedalus is up online. You can read it, Religion and Ecology, and the Climate Change. One other very nice resource that you might enjoy, maybe for teaching as well, is called Renewal. And this is 8 case studies in the US of religious grassroots environmentalism. One of them in Chicago is quite amazing, of a Christian and Islamic cooperation on food and so on. It's really fascinating. And that's part of the hope here, that there's cooperation across different religions. This is a whole series on ecology and justice, trying to put people and the planet, together to say the poor are being deeply impacted by climate change, environmental racism, and so on. Now, I'll stop here for a moment just to reflect what Whitney mentioned. So our teacher, Thomas Berry, if you come out of this little talk with anything, I hope you'll remember his name. And there's a website for him. You can watch some of his talks. We've put them up there now. He was quite extraordinary. And for his memorial in 2009, 1,000 people came to New York to celebrate him. It was amazing. So these are some of the books that he's done. Dream of the Earth is actually coming out in a new edition. But he said we need a new story for, this is where Journey of the Universe came from. But he also said we live in a sacred universe. Now, it kind of blew my mind when Columbia, which is a very sacred, very secular place, said we want that title of that book to be A Sacred Universe. Now, many scientists would be like, what? But that's part of the shift of consciousness, to say this isn't just an Earth community of resources, of exploitation or commodity, okay? It's not just commodity, it's community. And the whole difference there, it's not resource, it's a source of life, the Earth community. And that's the shift that we're into right now. So he would say we've got an ethics for homicide and suicide and genocide, but not biocide or geocide. You see, it's on that huge level we've got to rev up what is our ethical concern for species and ecosystems as well as humans. So I'm just going to skip over this. But what we have come to is the power. Some of you in this room will remember in 68, 69 when this blue marble picture came back from the astronauts. Okay, younger people will take this for granted. This was a consciousness shift that we are amidst, literally we know now, billions of galaxies, but this is a water-based planet. This is a blue-green planet, very special, with multiple cultures, multiple people. And so multiplicity, and yet what's the unity that we can bring forward for what Whitney has identified beautifully in his book, planetary citizenship. We're creating for the first time a multicultural but planetary civilization that recognizes difference and embraces it, but also says we're part of something that evolved. This evolved over 4.6 billion years. Our parents didn't even know this. So it's an exciting moment. And also that we come out of the galactic systems, that we are stardust, that all carbon-based life comes out of the explosion of stars. It's thrilling, but it's life-changing. So what am I suggesting? We're part of a Copernican moment. Copernicus understood that the center of the universe was the sun, and that was a whole new idea. So we are understanding that our planet and its specialness is part of a massive galactic system. The Milky Way is our galaxy, but there's literally billions of galaxies out there. This is a huge revolution, and how we fit into it is why we did Journey of the Universe, okay, this story and film and so on, and a series of conversations. And this is where I'm going to end, with the sense that we're trying to offer celebration. We're trying to offer a sense of hope, of how we belong to something large and mysterious and evolving, and something that has given us life, and it's still open-ended in its evolutionary trajectory. So that story of the universe, the story of the different world religions, how they fit into it, this cosmology and so on, is what we're trying to do for all future generations. And that we hope it will ignite the hope, we kind of say, the inspiration for the perspiration of the changes, for the transformation, for the long-term transformation. So thank you for being here tonight, and let's have some discussion, shall we? Thank you.
The control panel is behind her on the wall here.
Yeah, we're supposed to disable the position. We might not need it. I think we can. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so if you just have a question, just.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just came to mind. All right, so you talked about, all right.
Just use this for the, because we're filming it.
All right. So you spoke about coming up with like an ethic of, you know, geocide or ecocide, recognizing these values, and like, I guess, institutionalizing them. One thing that came to mind was, I believe it was Bolivia, who incorporated it into their constitution, was it?
Right.
The recognition of the right of Mother Nature, right?
Yep.
Do you know how that has, like, what's happened as a result of that?
Great. That's a wonderful question. So what actually happened in Bolivia and Ecuador have really gone towards the rights of nature, and they call it Pachamama, the rights of Mother Nature. And it's in the Constitution, as you've just said. But there's also a fascinating document that came about in Cochabamba, where 30,000 largely indigenous peoples from all over South America, but elsewhere, wrote what they're calling a universal declaration of the rights of Mother Nature. And they are like, very angry. It's what's happening with extractive industries, loss of their land, loss of their culture, big companies coming in, totally oblivious to it. So if you Google the rights of Mother Nature or the rights of nature, you'll see this document. It's very powerful. It was actually brought by the Venezuelan delegation to the hall of the United Nations and voted on. It was said this is important, it didn't go into an official document. But the other major charter that points towards this planetary civilization and planetary citizenship is called the Earth Charter. And that came out of the Rio conference in 1992. Gorbachev and Maurice Strong, a businessman, said we need an ethics for the future of the planet and for sustainable development. And that took 10 years. I was part of the drafting committee, the International Drafting Committee, about 25 people, came from all over the world. Amazing representation, amazing sense of the negotiation of that document, just as this one on the rights of Mother Nature. So these are emerging, from civil society, and I think hugely important for our collective future. So thank you for bringing that forward. Yeah. We have a class on law, environment, and religion at Yale that we're teaching right now with an environmental lawyer, and we've just gone through, we're bringing on board for discussion the Center for Earth Justice. Actually, at Barry University here, it started here, but Linda Sheehan is the person who's bringing forward this rights of nature. It's quite interesting. So it has some traction, slowly. Yeah. Yes?
May I continue your question? I think for me it was not really answered. Sorry to ask again, because I understood, or can I ask the question? Bolivia did it, Ecuador did it, but what happened? What changed? Is there some changes?
Yeah.
I doubt it.
Well, no, you're quite right to rephrase the question, and that's why I just said at the end here, Thomas Berry has at the end of his book, the one that I just showed there called Evening Thoughts, 12 principles for an Earth jurisprudence. And that has influenced a number of people for what's being called wild law, earth jurisprudence, the rights of nature, a movement that, as I just said, has at Barry Law School, has a center. This is amazing. This is 10 years ago that these ideas came forward. And Linda Sheehan works, she's done water issues actually as a lawyer throughout the California area for many, many years. And she said, we're not making traction. We need a different jurisprudence. So she is part of this Earth Center. And as I say, she's coming to Yale to talk in this class run through the law school. I think that's incredible in 10 years' time, you see. So it's not to say much more doesn't have to happen. And I'm not just being Pollyannish, and I'm not just saying we have to be patient. You know, I've talked about Blockadia. But I think these are radical new ways of thinking. And what is going to have traction in the long term? We have to be open to all kinds of things, actually. So 30,000 people gathering in Cochabamba. It's a movie. You know, I hope someone does a movie on this. Because the rage of people, what people are living with, the conditions, you know, and I'm not just talking about the US, I'm talking about people around the world who are really suffering from massive, rapid industrialization and modernization. If that isn't a justice issue, if that isn't a future of life issue, I don't know what is. Yeah. And some people are saying, there's a class being taught at Yale also, the point of it is sort of, climate change is putting in our face the need to make these changes, and the need to bring these voices from the outside into the center, which is what we're very much trying to do. So 1 foot in academia, and 1 big foot outside of academia too. Yes?
I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for your talk. I received my master's at University of Florida in religion and nature. So these are things that totally meshed for me. I guess my question, though, is now that I'm graduated, I'm an environmental organizer, so I'm trying to reach out to those religious groups, and I'm still finding that it hasn't yet trickled down. And I guess I'm just kind of wondering where the orthodoxy and the orthopraxy is going to be bridged, and if we're going to have to create a new religious view of the world, or is it going to have to be a political, like something driven in our culture, like a politically driven viewpoint?
Well, I'd love Emily Wurzba to come into the conversation here, because I think you're right to say, I've said for 20 years, religions are late in coming to this. Religions are necessary but not sufficient. We need science, we need policy, and so on. But I think, like, those of us who lived through the civil rights movement, and I went to college in Washington, D.C., to be involved in civil rights and to be involved in the anti-Vietnam War. And Nancy Pelosi was at my college, and Kathleen Sebelius, who headed up Health and Human Services. And, you know, when the we grew up in an apartheid society. We never tell our history correctly, right? But it was apartheid. Schools, black, white. You know, buses, black, white, etc. Selma, the film, you know, it's just incredible. And that's where change, too. We can have some hope of change. But I just want to put into the mix here that when the moral voice of Martin Luther King and others, and when they had what was called clergy and lay came together, it was a whole organization for civil rights, the moral force for change was incredible. Even though some churches resisted it, you know, and still have, and so on, but that moral force still has to come forward, right? From the grassroots and from the leaders and academic, that's what I was trying to say. And it's why I have a lot of hope in this encyclical. You see, it's going to be a moral tsunami. It's a tsunami. People won't be able to ignore climate change and so on. But let's get Emily into the discussion, because if I can say, her father teaches at Duke in the Divinity School and has done a lot on the Bible and nature. A good friend of Wendell Berry's, one of the great poets and writers. And tell us why you're here, Emily, not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, so I work in I work in Washington, D.C. for a Quaker faith-based lobbying organization, and a lot of the work that we're trying to do is help get different interfaith leaders and pastors and people of faith to really amplify the moral message to political leaders about why this is so important. And I think what we found is that there's so many ways that you can try to speak about environmental issues. You can talk about the science and the economics, and there's so many like kind of frames that you can take, but the moral and the faith messaging is really what's able to cut through a lot of the partisan rhetoric. So it's the way that you can connect with a political official by speaking from the heart and talking about how your own faith tradition talks about caring for God's creation and vulnerable communities and future generations. So we've really found that that's a really effective way to connect with legislators, because ultimately, you're right, you need this grassroots upswelling for political change, and that there's so many ways to make change, but you also need to be involved with your political officials. And so not giving up and really trying to connect to people of faith of all different traditions to get them to raise their voice and show that this isn't just an environmentalist issue, that it's something that affects everyone. And
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to say the evangelicals were very much moved. So this is picking up on Emily's point. The messenger is also very important, right? Or the language to a Protestant group, a Catholic group, an Orthodox group, an evangelical group. And here's an interesting story of how the evangelicals got on board for climate change and other issues. So 2 scientists in England brought about 20 of our major evangelical leaders to the UK and to a conference outside of Oxford. And they said, look, this is real. You know, they were part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but they were also evangelical, scientists and evangelicals. And so the message got through because they were credible, right? And that swept across a certain percentage of the evangelical. And now there's an well, there was even earlier, because they were part of our Harvard conference in '97, an evangelical environmental network. You can look at their website and so on. So the messenger is important, the medium's important, that it's way beyond the political issue is important, and so on. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
I'm getting my master's here in marine ecology. And we hear a lot about the fight between scientists and religious people, mostly Christian, over stuff like evolution. And so I didn't expect to see you showing so much support for environmentalism from Christian groups. So if the scientists and like the Christians and the politicians never is on board with it, why is there such a holdup still? Like, is it just a matter of time, or what are the other issues going on here?
No, that's great. It goes back to your question as well. You know, the thickest volume in that 10-volume series, 2 thick ones, Indigenous Traditions and Christianity. You know, and the publications in Christianity and ecology have exploded. We've talked a lot of the seminaries are still behind where they should be, you see, so that's why you're not hearing it in the churches or on the ground and so on. So we've been trying for almost 20 years to work with seminaries and elevate this issue. And there's a Green Seminary Initiative that some of our friends and Laurel Kearns and others have been involved in. So there's a number of reasons why. It's what I'm saying on the one hand is an explosion of interest on the ground work that's in the last few years especially, I would say, is beginning to be elevated. So the Climate March in New York in September 21st, 22nd, that weekend, there was a whole huge Religions for the Earth conference at Union Seminary in New York, connected to Columbia. 200 religious leaders and so on came, we participated in that. But in the Climate March of 400,000 people, there were 10,000 people from the religious communities there. It was a watershed, and it was noticeable. So, and I keep saying the encyclical will elevate that, you see. So that's, I think, some of the, where we're going. And also why we're very keen to work at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, where our dean, been on email with him back and forth today, because he's so intent on doing this panel, even before the encyclical comes out. It's fascinating to me. It's just fascinating. Yes?
Thank you for coming. I work with the Global Catholic Climate Movement, which is a growing movement of Catholics around the world to act on climate change. And our first action has been a Lenten climate fast. And we have 1,000 people signed up in 50 different countries to fast during Lent. And so my interest is around spiritual practice and its role in this movement. So I don't know if you could speak of any other examples, like you mentioned Sundance, of like the role of spiritual practice in engaging people in this issue, but also in terms of dealing just with the intensity of climate change. Because I think some people don't want to engage because it's like when they really take it in, it's like it's too much.
Right.
Like it's too much to take in.
Right.
So what role do spiritual practices play?
Yeah, and we put up in our last newsletter this carbon fast, Lenten fast, so it's on our newsletter, and be happy to make. I'm pretty sure your organization's connected to this work, this forum work, and the newsletter. And you know, in full disclosure, I come from Catholic progressive tradition myself. That's why I was involved in civil rights and the anti-war movement, and to a certain extent this, you know, and it's why the encyclical will bring together the justice issues for humans and the ecological issues, and that's so important for all traditions. But so your point is hugely significant, namely, what are spiritual practices? Because, you know, I think, and I don't imagine too many of you would disagree, I think we are all suffering from a massive but unannounced, unspoken sense of loss, of the sad, bad news which saturates us. Whether, you know, of course there's terrorism and Ebola and so on, but we are in the midst of a sixth extinction period. That we are causing the extinction of species on such a massive level. Most people have no idea about that. And again, where are the religious communities talking about it? You know, but on the floor of the American Museum of Natural History in the Hall of Biodiversity, there's a plaque there saying we are in the midst of a sixth extinction, but we can stem the tide of destruction. That's a very powerful phrase. We can stem the tide of destruction. And the Natural History Museum in 1998 gave us the IMAX Theater rent-free. 1,000 people came. Bill Moyers interviewed all the religious leaders. We had scientists and economists and so on. And they said, why were they doing this? Because at that time they were looking for a curator in ornithology, birds. And at that time, 1998, 6 of the PhD candidates, 4 of them had had their birds go extinct while they were studying them. And the museum just woke up, like saying, are we going to watch at the edge of extinction, you know, life disappearing? But what I'm saying is scientists, I'm sure people in this room, are suffering. Some people are even saying from post-traumatic stress disorder because of what they're seeing. And I have seen that from climate scientists who are in despair of why this message isn't getting out. But I think we're all at the edge of despair, hopelessness, disempowerment, a sense of what can we actually do. So I come back to this question without like, here's 5 things for spiritual practice and so on, but I have been writing in my diaries for 30 years about this issue. You know, that if we can find within ourselves a ground for hope, a ground for possibility, if we can generate the end, that's why I refer to spiritual energy of renewal. So what I want to say is I think one of the great challenges to the religious communities is, are we going to set up rituals or rites of mourning, of loss? Are we going to set up rituals of celebration, on the other hand, so that we help people to get through what E.O. Wilson describes as an hourglass of the lessening of life, you know, to a new period that Thomas Berry identifies as an ecozoic period, where science and religion and humanities can create. We're literally creating new civilizational constructs, you see, and they are going to require music, art, rituals of a profound spiritual nature, you see. So I give your question back to you and others. It's going to be hugely important.
I just wanted to add to that too. As you all know, there's a whole. I mean, in a world where we're sort of fossil fueled and sped up, right, through this space-time crunch of speed that leads to globalization. I think that religious traditions have multiple things to offer in terms of practices for unplugging, meditation, yoga, so these other things. Also, other traditions, as many of you know, there's now concepts of eco-kosher and eco-halal, right? These are transformation of old traditions to fit the current ecological crisis. You have things like, that make sense, like jubilee years and sabbaticals, right? Where you let the land lie fallow and you forgive all debts and redistribute debts. In fact, the Pope, the last 2 popes ago now, sorry, and Bono came together to try in 2000 to have this jubilee year project, right? In which third world debt was forgiven, right? I don't know how you can think you're doing something right if the Pope and Bono are against you. But, of course, that didn't happen. But still, there are all these really old traditions that I think can be retooled to help address these issues in our own context.
Someone over here, as the microphone's going, one of the great rituals in New York City is at the Cathedral St. John the Divine, the Earth Mass. It's called Misa Gaia, and so the animals come in, and Paul Winter, the great musician, who's a very good friend of ours, very much influenced by Thomas Way, been doing it for 30 years. And he does a solstice service. They brought this great singer from Puerto Rico this past solstice. Incredible. You know, several thousand people in the cathedral celebrating these seasonal cycles and so on. Please.
My name is Greg Maggiano. I'm with Trinity Cathedral here in Miami. And I wanted to answer your question about other practices. Last year, we did a Lenten series on the environment, and the whole theme was on reconciliation and recognition that we are culpable in what's been happening here in Miami, in part because we're the oldest church in the city, and so we and our founders were the ones who took out the mangroves and dug up rivers and planted the Everglades and all that. And one of the rites that we did was the Episcopal tradition were very liturgically oriented. So we have a rite for, you pray over those who are near death. And so we said those prayers over the Biscayne Bay, which is right outside the church. And I think reclaiming, as you were saying, some of our older practices and reforming them and repurposing them gives us sort of a new perspective on our own traditions, especially the things that we don't use as much, but also another way to interact with recognizing that the bay is a living thing. It is our neighbor, and it is near death because the stuff that we did was unexpectedly powerful. I also wanted to answer your question about why doesn't something happen if everyone is sort of in agreement. And I think you are right that I just graduated seminary 2 years ago, and we have one class on the environment, one more than most seminaries do. But we have one thing that they teach in all seminaries is that we now live in a post-Christian world, right? In the US, we're sort of in post-Christian or post-religious world. And the reality of that means that because we are people who like to get attention, we want to be in the forefront. And so instead of the religion dictating what the world talks about, the world dictates what the churches talk about. And so because churches tend to be if you're in a conservative church, the talking points are going to be about abortion and gay marriage and immigration or whatever hot button issue you want it to be. And if you're in a progressive church, it's going to be gay marriage again and the environment and immigration and Black Lives Matter and these things. And so we've lost our moral voice because we're so busy trying to parrot what we hear on Fox News or MSNBC or whatever else we're watching. So my question for you is, this I think is a time when the religious people of all stripes can regain their own moral voice in taking up this issue, where we don't have to parrot what we're hearing because we're not being paid by a large multinational corporation who is invested in the status quo. How do we do it?
Yeah, it's a great point. And we do it with courage and boldness and authenticity. I think churches have lost authenticity by and large. And authenticity is palpable. Why is Catcher in the Rye such a powerful novel? It's all about authenticity. So I think this not an easy question. It's a hugely important question. And I think with the mainline churches declining in numbers, there's all this worry and so on. But, you know, in the midst of decline, in the midst of institutions unraveling, including all our major institutions are unraveling. Religion, education, trying to find its way, economics and business and politics, they're all unraveling. You know, we've got total dysfunction in Congress and whatnot. But in the midst of the unraveling, there are new things emerging that I think will be the foundations, you see, of a future for our children and their children. But it is going to take long-term and sustained energy and voices that are going to speak out against a massively saturated consumer society. That, you know, I travel extensively in the rest of the world. We're 4% of the world's population, consuming 25% of the world's resources. We are so disliked, I need not say. Even this summer, I'm in England teaching and watching the World Cup games, and here's the US on the World Cup games. We're in England, right? These are our friends. People are booing us. I mean, it's kind of sad. It's really sad. So I think, you know, I don't go to the patriotism thing. I'm not going there because Giuliani's just gone there with Obama. But this country does have immense potential. And if and when the religious communities, and not just people in religion, people who have moral values and a spiritual energy stand up, I think it's going to be transforming. You know, this journey of the universe is also something you can use in your communities. Contrary to what we've, so it's on TV, it's on PBS for 3 years, so several million people watched it that way, 77% of the stations. But on Netflix, in 1 year, 67,000 people have rated it. There's something hungry for this connection, you see? Use this. Get people talking. Okay, sorry, someone's in the back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question, I'm a scientist, and my question is, I'm recognizing a missing link in this whole thing. I'm also Jewish, and I'm active in my synagogue, and very much involved in the green movement. My bachelor's is environmental science, so I'm right there. But one of the things that's missing is, how do you connect, if all of these people and all of these religions are all on board, how do you get through to those who are actually destroying the environment? Ecuador is a mess. I have been there 6 times, and it's a mess with deforestation, mining for everything from gold to oil. And I mean, they're just totally ruining the ecosystem. How do you connect with the people who are actually doing the damage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, I want to say, in relation to what you just said and the scientists over here, I'm not suggesting there are hundreds of thousands of people in these religions doing this. No, it's a small number of people who are beginning to retrieve, reevaluate, and reconstruct these traditions, ritual-wise, scripture-wise, tradition-wise. It's going to take a long time. But you know what? It's like civil rights. When it became visible, wow, change really happened. We have a long way to go still. But, so I just want to keep in mind, I'm not over-exaggerating that everyone's on board here. But your point about business, about corporate responsibility, and so on and so forth, it's very important, it's very complex. There's a huge movement at our School of the Environment for, with the business school, for corporate responsibility, for entrepreneurship that's green and responsible. And this is what the next generation wants. Everything we did in the Harvard conferences and these series in New York at the Natural History Museum and the UN had people from the business community. So they've got to be part of the conversation, right? Because we kept saying it's SEEP. It's science, it's economics, it's the environment, it's policy. Science, economics was, you know, right in there. And I could list all kinds of organizations. There's one called Ceres that is doing, you know, the responsibility of corporations. But you know what? Here's one very practical thing. My brother's head of Chubb Insurance in New York. If we call out the insurance industries on climate change, you know how difficult it is to get insurance on coastal water property? Chubb Insurance withdrew from that a dozen years ago. So smaller insurance companies came on board. Why aren't they at the table? Because the Swiss Re, the big reinsurance companies, you look on their websites, they know climate change isn't, just a myth or something. They know big time because they're going to lose their shirts. We have a few more Sandys and so on. My brother's at the end of Manhattan. For 6 months, all those tall buildings, office buildings, were out of commission from Sandy, right? Long Island, you can't get insurance in certain places on these coastal waters. And I'm on this board called Climate Central in Princeton. You go on there and you can put your zip code in, any coastal water area in the US, you can find how many years it's going to take before the sea levels, are rising. So there's immense power there in the corporate world. There's also conscience. I mean, my brother is hugely concerned about these issues, you see. So we've got to bring those people to the table and create new coalitions, which are still on the horizon. And we've got to call responsibility with Blockadia, a whole range of things, at the table and protests,
We have 2 questions on the floor, and then I want to come to a close. There's also, by the way, there's books right outside the store for purchase that I'm sure Miriam would be happy to sign, perhaps after we wrap up here. So 2 more questions.
My name is Carlos Pagan, and I've been a student of life sciences for a long time. And I'd like to talk a little about the transcendental nature of this conversation. People that study life sciences know that there's a physiosphere, and from that, a biosphere, and a noosphere, where our consciousness has gone. In evolution, a path of evolution, and above that, people that want to go out on a limb can talk about a theosphere. What's happening at CERN, where they're talking about a oneness of consciousness, of everything, a theory of oneness, could that be part of what we're sensing in a kind of a subconscious distress about the oneness of all of us?
That is such a great question. And so in one of the very first little books I did, called Worldly Wonder, I said, to your point, I think, as we are discovering, thanks to all of the sciences, this great epic of evolution, for the first time in human history, we're putting together our story from the life sciences and the physical sciences and so on. That's very exciting. So we're discovering that unity and diversity. And we're also discovering, at the same time, what we're destroying. So it's why we made this film. Exactly to say we are part of a living, organic system. This biosphere is what's keeping us alive, a thin, thin layer. And the noosphere, I'm totally with you in terms of that. So I think we are at this very critical juncture of realizing what we're part of and what we're destroying. And that can be a moment of immense change of human consciousness. It really is huge. It's on the order of a Copernican revolution of what we belong to. And that's the excitement, and it's where Thomas Berry would say, we're part of a great work. And that great work is the work being done on the ground by many, many people, and people in academia, et cetera. So thank you for that question. I think it's emergent for sure in many parts of the world.
Yeah, I born in very religious family, and I did my PhD in ecology. So discussion of ecology and religion always inspires me a lot. I have this typical, I would ask you, there's a typical opinion among some religions that everything is distant, like there's a destiny for everything, and God has created this land and He's taking care of this and He will be taking care of that. If there is destruction somewhere is happening by human, that is also destined. It's supposed to happen, so you cannot stop it. So how would you answer this this typical opinion in some religions?
Okay, it's typical in some religions, as you just said, sort of predestination. It's certainly, it's not, well, karma has some resonances with that, but I was going to say it's not really present in the Asian religions like some certain parts of Christianity, I would say, for example. So it's a really important question, you know, it's sort of fatalism, predestination, and so on. You know, we lived through James Watts, who was the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, was it? And he was...
You're changing the name back then. He was in charge.
Yeah, I mean, so he had this view, you know, we're going to destroy it anyway. So I think it's a very small view. We can't ignore it. You're right to bring it up. But it is by way of saying again and again that human action, human participation, human creativity, you see, predestination just gets into like, sit back, eat your chips, watch TV, you know, carpe diem, seize the day. But I think, you know, despite all odds, we don't have children, but our students are our children. And I think that's the sense that we can create ways of nurturing. But people who have children know what the immense sacrifice is that they wouldn't have imagined, right? What is that coming from? It's coming from a sense of wanting to be part of life and life systems. I'm not advocating children are not children, but what I'm saying is the creativity of humans is almost boundless. Then that is one thing that we can rely on, we can move forward in alignment with good science, with these processes of nature. This is all about aligning our food systems, you see, our water, the Everglades, aligning us to the natural systems, restoring restoration. Anyway, you can see I can go on, and there's one person who has one more question.
No,
maybe.
it's not a question.
Okay.
I was just going to say that you can turn it on its head and just say the destiny could be fixing it after we destroy it. So, and that's it, like and you do away with the problem. Like you can say that part of the destiny isn't just destroying it, it's after that you fix it. And it's like, okay, there you go. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I would even answer that, but anyway, let's just, thank you, let's go to the next one.
Yeah, thanks for letting me get in here at the end. I wanted to get your thoughts on the phenomenon of thousands of people of non-indigenous backgrounds going to the Amazon and drinking ayahuasca, which people who had drank it say gives them a profound sense of, you know, interconnectedness with other beings and sort of an eco-spiritual consciousness and connection with nature and the earth. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that in general, and maybe its possibilities for ecological activism or something in that.
Well, you know, I think a lot of drugs, frankly, whether it's ayahuasca, are trying to get people to connect, to overcome the immense loneliness that modernity has created. This alienation and loneliness is just epidemic. So I think that's what the 60s were about too, you know, making a connection to people, to nature, and so on. You know, we can do this through spiritual practices, you can do it through drugs, you can do it through music and the arts and so on. So I think this is just emblematic of what people feel they need to connect to. But the point of all of this is not that you do, most of the religions would say you're not doing this just for yourself, you're doing it to give back to society and future generations. And that's what I was trying to say in the last question. So yeah, if you do drugs in the Amazon, there's a whole group, the Pachamama group, based in San Francisco, is actually doing that, taking people down there for the experience, not just ayahuasca, but they're completely oriented towards the ecological future, you see. So,
well, we could go on for a while. Just want to say that Mariel and I were talking about today in the car, like how incredible it is that 10 years ago, if you were for gay marriage, you were in the minority, and now if you're for gay marriage, you are in the majority. That just took 10 years. When I was a kid, my grandfather could safely from his front door shoot dogs that came into the yard with BB guns. Today, I don't think many people would accept that. You can't just go around kicking animals, right? So change can happen really fast, and I think that I think eventually with all these little, with all these different tributaries flowing into this river, that there will eventually be a watershed moment that will create a tipping point at which it will not be acceptable to be a responsible citizen and not be an environmentalist, right? And not be concerned with this. So thank you so much for your work in this area and for being here.